Ramesh Srinivasan is a professor at UCLA's Department of Information Studies. He joins us live from Ventura in California. And so Brazil, like many countries around the world, finds itself dealing with the parameters around free speech. Of course, this is being debated everywhere at the moment, but of course, we see this clampdown on disinformation on the part of far-right politicians, especially those allied to Bolsonaro. That's what the Supreme Court is trying to do, while others are saying that this endangers democracy. What do you make of how that argument applies to Brazil?
Yeah, I mean, I think a few quick things. First of all, as we know, looking at Brazil's history, the Supreme Court has always been in the middle of tricky political battles and political decisions. So to sort of presume that the Supreme Court is somehow naturally aligned against Jair Bolsonaro, ignores the fact that the Supreme Court was actively engaged in a case against Lula and Dilma Rousseff just some years ago. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I think this is directly tied to the history we've seen where there's been a spat between the Supreme Court and Mr. Musk. And I think a lot of that has to do with the Supreme Court's requests for particular accounts to be deplatformed, which Musk deems as censorship, which in turn led to the Supreme Court saying, well, Musk, you yourself are censoring particular accounts. So then Musk making particular comments about the Supreme Court's inadequacy of dealing with Mr. Bolsonaro likely reads less as an argument that's based on depth of knowledge about the particular issue, and more just sort of Musk in a spat, if you will, with the Brazilian Supreme Court. But I think the most important thing that we always need to remember is that what free speech is and what counts as free speech really depends on the jurisdiction of a nation state. And also online, as we've talked about before on Al Jazeera, not all speech is equal. A lot of speech that tends to be more visible and therefore circulates further is more viral. And a lot of that speech tends to be more on the fringe, whether it's left or right. So I think these are all confounding issues that are related to this particular, if you will, sort of soap opera moment between the spat between these two individuals.
Yes, well, there is a couple of different spats going on, but we see Elon Musk wading into this. He is now the great defender of free speech, as he would define it, isn't he? Because he is now he has now criticized that the Supreme Court judge who is going after these particular social media accounts, people he says are discrediting the voting system in Brazil, and I suppose playing very nicely into the hands of Jair Bolsonaro.
Sure, you're right. I mean, definitely, there's there's a lot of issues, right? So extreme speech, by and large, often ends up being more visible because it's more viral, right? And we know that many on the right, including the former president of Brazil, Mr. Bolsonaro, and many of his supporters, like other right-wingers around the world, have tended to work with their own digital armies of people who sometimes spread disinformation. Musk, of course, claims to be a pro-free speech absolutist. In theory, I support that because I think all speech and all people should have opportunities to share their voices on all platforms of all kinds, because otherwise, how do we engage in dialogue with one another? The issue, however, is that the devil's always in the details, right? So what are the specific ways in which Musk is actually able to, or not, which is generally my conclusion, support, equality of voices from different perspectives, right? And so that's the issue.
Well, he doesn't...
The underlying issue really is
No, please carry on.
No, I think the underlying issue is that speech of all kinds needs to be able to circulate and inform and be in dialogue with one another, rather than simply, kind of basically buying into these larger sort of slogans of, supporting free speech. The devil's in the details. That's really my point. And the details have a lot to do with the algorithms, policies on what is or is not deplatformed, and so on.
So is this more than a question of having the right sort of regulation in place, which I suppose someone like Elon Musk has proved is very difficult? He has his offices in Brazil. He is now saying that he won't deactivate the accounts of those of the hard right politicians being targeted by the Supreme Court judge. So it's become this sort of, it's turning into a political spat. X is saying that they are going to comply with the ruling. So even if you try to regulate something like this, very difficult when you have the head of a global company like X that is selective in terms of whether or not he intervenes in Brazil, but then, he's silent when it comes to India and China.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think Musk, his own positions on things tends to influence a lot of decisions, and obviously what he writes about and what he chooses to share or not share. And it's a strange moment we're in, where a single individual is the dominant owner of such an important platform in Twitter/X, which is so important also on journalism itself, because many people, there may not be as many users of Twitter as other platforms, Facebook's platforms, for example, Instagram, et cetera, but it's very influential on journalism. So Musk himself has tended to, at times, veer toward, in my opinion, the petty, getting in spats, getting in battles, getting in fights. It's also clear by some of his positions that he does tend to take political perspectives that might be more on what we might call the right, or parts of the right. But the real issue is equity. I'm all about free speech, and he should be as well, and I appreciate that. But he should always balance that with an idea of equity and dialogue. And it's not clear to me how, if at all, he's doing that.
Ramesh Srinivasan, thank you so much.